RG503 is Anbernics' latest retro emulation handheld system, but how does it hold up against some seriously stiff competition? Anbernics have been a huge name in the world of retro emulation handheld consoles over the past couple of years, creating some of the best devices on the market. The RG351 was absolutely fantastic and one of my favourite consoles for the past 2 years. The RG552 came out and tried to improve in almost every single area, bringing a lot more to the retro emulation handheld device concept. But now the Anbernics RG503 has arrived, and Anbernics have gone in a completely direction. Instead of just improving on the 552, they've actually made the 503 quite a different kind of retro handheld console, with the focus not being on adding more raw power or focusing purely on the emulation capabilities. With the RG503, Anbernics have introduced an OLED screen and changed the form factor for the first time in ages, meaning that the RG503 sits somewhere in between the RG351 and the RG552. But are these incremental differences to the emulation and these drastic changes to the form factor and the screen worth £140? Now, the first thing I noticed when I switched on the RG503 is just how gorgeous the OLED screen actually looks. The colours are so vibrant and it is instantly noticeable. OLED screens have been around for a while and they're known for their deep blacks and rich colours. If you're a fan of the PS Vita, you'll be well aware of the argument between the original PS Vita and the new updated version of the Vita, where the original had the OLED screen, and a lot of people preferred that to the later improved model. Now, there are pros and cons to an OLED screen, and one of the cons is the fact that it isn't quite as crisp when movement is involved, and when it comes to gaming, that's a pretty important thing. However, in all honesty, considering the RG503 deals with retro games, this isn't as much of an issue, and the benefits you get from the rich colours and the deep blacks really stands out and makes the RG503 an amazing and gorgeous screen to play on. Next up is the form factor, and I'm a huge fan of the changes that Anbernics have made for the RG503. I'm still waiting to see my staggered shoulder buttons. However, the changes that the RG503 have brought in means that having the shoulder buttons in a line, as is traditional for Anbernics, is now a lot more comfortable and user-friendly. There's a much more noticeable step change between the R1 and the R2 buttons, and the same goes for the L1 and L2 as well. It means you can now roll your finger more comfortably to hit both buttons, and because R2 is higher, you can hit that without risking hitting R1 as well. I really feel like Anbernics have listened to what the community was saying, and although they've stuck true to the traditional form factor, it's now so much more comfortable to use. Furthermore, in the area of comfort, the RG503 has now got rounded shoulders for you to actually hold onto the console, which is a drastic change from the more squared off style that the RG351 and the RG552 had. This means that there's just so much more grip and makes the RG503 one of the most comfortable retro emulation handheld devices I've ever had the pleasure of using. Whereas with pretty much all retro emulation handheld devices, there's been a point that after playing for a few hours you start to notice the cramp. With the RG503, I haven't noticed it at all, and I really hope that Anbernics take this design and form factor and use it for all their future consoles. Furthermore, in size, the RG503 sits in between the 351 and the 552, whereas the 351 was probably a bit too small for the majority of users and the 552 was maybe a bit too big to consider it pocketable. The 503 sits perfectly in the middle, in that Goldilocks zone that makes it really nice to hold, yet incredibly easy to just throw in your pocket and take anywhere that you go. And this for me is really important when it comes to retro emulation handheld devices. Now, one thing I was sad to see go on the 503 compared to the 552 was the fact that the 503 does not support an Android OS. And although I'm a big fan of Anbernics Linux operating systems, I really liked having the option of Android on the 552, especially when it gave me access to game streaming services like Game Pass and Stadia. The RG503, as is indicated in the name of a lot of its listings, is purely Linux focused. And in some respects, it's pretty nice that this console is purely focused on retro emulation. But what it does mean is that the RG503 won't be my ultimate handheld device that I'll be using all of the time. It means I'm going to have to revert to the 552 or the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus if I want to get that Android experience, if I want to get game streaming on the go. When it comes to processing power, again, the RG503 sits in between the 351 and the 552. Where the 552 has the most powerful processor and the 351 has the least powerful, the RG503 sits somewhere in the middle. However, in all honesty, when it came to the emulation experience, the fact that it sat in the middle wasn't entirely clear. Emulation on the RG503 is much closer to the 351 than the 552, meaning that it can struggle with games from the Dreamcast generation and the N64, including the PSP, and I was even surprised to see it struggling with some DS games as well. One thing I was pleased to see was that the PlayStation 1 emulation though was really smooth, and in my experience I had no issues with any of the games that I tried. Now if you're a forgiving gamer and this is your only retro emulation device, then you will be able to comfortably play a lot of games, but you will notice those issues. But if you are looking for perfect emulation from the N64 upwards, then you're not going to find it here. Which brings about the question, where is the RG503's place in the currently crowded retro emulation handheld market? Especially considering that you can get a more powerful and feature-rich device from Anbernics themselves. And I've been giving this a lot of thought recently and trying to understand the seemingly complex route that Anbernics are taking now with the releases of their devices. We're no longer seeing the traditional path of every device being a marked improvement over the last. And in the world of gaming, in the world of console generations, that's what we'll come to expect. Every console generation that comes out, especially from the same manufacturer, is brought out to be an improvement. But I think Anbernics are starting to take a slightly different approach and trying to approach this more from the perspective of the mobile phone market, where you have a range of devices that offer different things to different people across a range of prices as well. The RG351 is a great cheap option and very pocketable for anybody that just wants that quick retro gaming experience. The RG552 is the more expensive device that tries to offer you everything. And the RG503 sits somewhere in the middle for those people that want to spend a little bit more and get the benefits of an OLED screen and a better form factor, but don't necessarily want to fork out the big bucks to get the extra features as well. However, I think I like this approach. It gives people a lot of options who want to enter the market, and it gives Anbernics a chance to try different things, different form factors and different features that they can roll into future releases as we get closer to that perfect retro emulation handheld device. Furthermore, feeding into this concept, Anbernics are working on the Win 600 as well, which is a competitor for the likes of the Steam Deck, which just goes to show you the range of handheld devices that Anbernics want to cover. Honestly, if Anbernics could refine in a few areas and keep their pricing highly competitive, they could be one of the best handheld console manufacturers around. If you are contemplating an RG503, then the benefits are an awesome OLED screen, a fantastic form factor, and a brilliant balance between pocketability and size. However, you do have to consider the fact that PSP, N64 and Dreamcast emulation is going to suffer a little bit on the device, especially compared to what else is available. The RG503 can be found on average for about £140, and I will put a link in the description below if you want to grab yourself one. Now, if you want to see the level of competition in the retro handheld market, then check out the review of the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus.